Cthulhu's Return and Kenny's Secret. Chapter 1. The Recurring Nightmare. Kenny McCormick woke up with a start, his heart pounding against his chest. It was the same dream again: darkness, screaming, and then nothingness. Every night for as long as he could remember, the dreams had haunted him. Visions of his own death, over and over again, in ways so bizarre and numerous that it seemed impossible for a single mind to conjure them all. He glanced at the alarm clock beside his mattress. 3:33 a.m. The witching hour, his mother had once called it when she was sober enough to speak of such things. Kenny pulled his tattered orange parka closer, even though he was indoors. The McCormick household was never warm enough in the winter months of South Park. Outside, the Colorado snow fell silently, coating the poor side of town in deceptive purity. Kenny could hear his father, Kevin S.R., snoring in the next room, likely passed out after another night of drinking with his mother, Carol. His siblings, Kevin and Corinne, were asleep too, oblivious to the cosmic horror that had plagued their family for generations. Only Kenny remembered. Only Kenny knew the truth. Every time he died, whether crushed by a piano, eaten by rats, decapitated by ninja stars, or countless other gruesome ends, he would simply wake up in his bed the next morning, his parka hood pulled tightly around his face, as if nothing had happened. And nobody, not a single soul in South Park, would remember his demise. Not his friends Stan, Kyle, or even that fat asshole Cartman. Not his teachers, not his family. It was as if some cosmic reset button was hit every time his heart stopped beating. Kenny climbed out of bed and walked to the window, watching his breath form small clouds against the cold glass. In the distance, he could see the silhouette of South Park Elementary, where tomorrow he would once again join his classmates, none of whom would recall that just yesterday he had been impaled by a flagpole during gym class. "Why me?" Kenny whispered, his voice muffled even to himself. He reached under his mattress and pulled out an old, tattered book bound in leather so dark it seemed to absorb light. The cover bore strange sigils that seemed to move if you looked at them for too long. The book had been passed down through generations of McCormicks, though most of his family had forgotten its significance. Only Kenny had taken the time to decipher its strange language, to understand the curse that had been placed upon him. The cult of Cthulhu, the immortal child, the dark offering. The book spoke of a ritual his parents had participated in years ago, before he was born. A Cthulhu cult meeting where they had drunk deeply of the sacred brew and promised their unborn child to the old ones in exchange for cosmic rewards that never materialized. Kenny was that child, cursed to die repeatedly only to be reborn in an endless cycle of suffering. Kenny flipped through the brittle pages until he found a particular illustration: a hooded figure standing before a massive, tentacled monstrosity emerging from a portal. The hooded figure wore an emblem that looked eerily similar to the question mark Kenny donned when he became his alter ego, Mysterion. A sudden noise outside made Kenny jump. He peered through the frost-covered window and saw something that made his blood run cold. A hooded figure standing in the snow, looking directly at his window. Behind the figure, other shapes moved in the darkness, their forms obscured by the falling snow. Kenny quickly hid the book and crawled back into bed, pulling the covers over his head. Tomorrow, he would need to talk to his friends. Something was happening in South Park again, something connected to his curse. And this time, Kenny was determined to find answers once and for all. As he drifted back to sleep, Kenny heard a faint chanting coming from outside, words in a language no human tongue was meant to speak. The last thought that crossed his mind before unconsciousness claimed him was simple and chilling. Phnglui, mglwnaf, Cthulhu r lie, w gonagal fh dan. In his dreams, the Dark Lord Cthulhu stirred, reaching out across dimensions with tentacles of madness, searching for the immortal child of South Park. Chapter 2: Mysterion Rises. The next day at South Park Elementary started like any other. The boys gathered at the bus stop, bundled against the bitter Colorado cold. "Did you guys see that weird shit on the news last night?" Stan asked, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Kyle adjusted his green Ushanka. "About those people in robes gathering at Stark's Pond." "Yeah, my dad says they're just some environmental group protesting the new mall construction." "Environmental group my ass," Cartman interjected, his round face flushed from the cold. "They're obviously a cult. Probably Jews trying to summon their money god or something." "Shut up, fat ass," Kyle snapped. "Not everything is a Jewish conspiracy." Kenny stood silently, listening to his friends bicker. He knew what those robed figures really were, but his warnings would come out muffled through his parka, misunderstood or ignored as always. Besides, they wouldn't remember his death yesterday anyway. What was the point? The school day dragged on, Mr. Garrison rambling about celebrities and politics rather than teaching fourth-grade material. During lunch, Kenny picked at his free meal while his friends discussed the new Terrence and Phillip special. But Kenny's mind was elsewhere, consumed by the chanting he had heard the night before and the hooded figures outside his window. As the final bell rang, Kenny made a decision. Tonight, Mysterion would return to the streets of South Park. Under the cover of darkness, Kenny donned the purple cape and hood that transformed him from the poor, forgotten kid into South Park's vigilante protector. The question mark attached to his hood bobbed slightly as he moved silently across the rooftops of the town. From this vantage point, he could see groups of robed figures converging on the community center. Mysterion made his way there, slipping through an open window on the second floor. Inside, he crouched in the shadows of the balcony overlooking the main hall. Below, dozens of hooded cultists formed a circle around a crude altar. Kenny recognized several townspeople among them: Mr. Mackey, Officer Barbretti, even Principal Victoria. All wore ceremonial robes adorned with the symbol of Cthulhu. "Brothers and sisters," a voice called out, and Kenny was shocked to see his own father step forward to address the gathering. Kevin McCormick, SR, looked different, sober, focused, his eyes gleaming with fanatical light. "The stars have aligned. The gate between worlds thins. Soon our dark lord Cthulhu shall return, and with him the final revelation about the immortal child." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Kenny leaned forward, straining to hear more. "For years we have witnessed the miracle," his father continued. "Death cannot claim him. The child returns again and again, a living anchor between our world and the realm of the old ones." Kenny's blood ran cold. They knew about his immortality. Somehow, unlike everyone else in town, these cultists remembered his deaths. "Tomorrow night," Kevin SR proclaimed, "when the moon is dark, we shall perform the rite of revelation. The immortal child will be brought before Cthulhu, and the final phase of our Lord's return will commence." The cultists began to chant, the same eldritch words Kenny had heard outside his window. As they chanted, the air in the center of their circle began to shimmer and distort. Kenny watched in horror as a small tear in reality formed, revealing glimpses of something vast and impossible beyond, a suggestion of tentacles, eyes, and madness. Suddenly, a cultist pointed toward the balcony. "Intruder!" she cried. All eyes turned toward Kenny. His father looked up, and for a brief moment their eyes met across the distance. Recognition flickered in Kevin SR's gaze. "Seize him," he commanded. "It's the immortal one, my son." Kenny turned to flee, but the exit was already blocked by cultists racing up the stairs. With no other choice, he ran to the balcony railing and leaped off, cape billowing behind him. He crashed through a window, glass shattering around him, and tumbled onto the snow-covered ground below. Pain shot through his leg, broken, probably, but he forced himself to his feet and ran limping into the night. Behind him, cultists poured out of the community center, their chants now replaced by shouts of pursuit. Kenny ducked into an alley, tore off his Mysterion costume, and stuffed it into a backpack he had hidden there earlier. Then, as just Kenny McCormick in his orange parka, he emerged onto the main street, trying to walk normally despite his injured leg. He needed to warn someone, but who would believe him? Who would remember tomorrow if he died tonight? Kenny made his way toward the Marsh residence. If anyone would help him, it would be Stan, even if he had to convince him of the danger all over again. As he limped down the street, Kenny noticed the stars overhead shifting in impossible ways, forming patterns that hurt his eyes. The veil between worlds was thinning, just as his father had said. And somehow Kenny was the key to Cthulhu's return. Chapter 3. The Truth Beneath the Lake. Stan's bedroom window was unlocked, as usual. Kenny grimaced as he pulled himself inside, his broken leg sending waves of pain through his body. "Dude," Stan exclaimed, startled from his computer where he had been playing Minecraft. "What the hell, Kenny?" Kenny pulled down his hood, something he rarely did. "Stan, I need your help. Something really bad is happening in South Park." To Kenny's surprise, Stan's eyes widened in recognition. "You're the immortal kid, aren't you? I remember now. I've seen you die." Kenny froze. "You remember?" "Not always," Stan admitted, rubbing his temples. "It's like fragments of memories that don't make sense. Dreams where you're crushed or shot or eaten and then you're just back the next day." I thought I was going crazy. Hope surged in Kenny's chest. If Stan could remember even partially, there was a chance. "Listen carefully," Kenny said, sitting on Stan's bed. "My parents were part of a Cthulhu cult before I was born. They made some kind of deal, and now I can't stay dead. But the cult is active again, and they're planning something big tomorrow night. They say I'm the key to bringing Cthulhu back into our world." Stan was quiet for a long moment. "This is some heavy shit, dude." "I know how it sounds, but," Kenny began. "No," Stan interrupted. "I believe you. Weird stuff happens in this town all the time. Remember the giant guinea pigs? Or the time all the adults got high on cat pee and saw cheesing hallucinations? A Cthulhu cult is actually pretty on brand for South Park." Kenny couldn't help but laugh, though it quickly turned into a grunt of pain from his leg. "Jesus, you're hurt," Stan said, noticing Kenny's awkward posture. "Let me get my dad's first aid kit." While Stan left to retrieve supplies, Kenny went to the window. The night sky seemed darker than usual, the stars arranged in configurations that made his head hurt. He could feel something pulling at the edges of his perception, something vast and ancient that knew his name. Stan returned with bandages and pain relievers. As he helped Kenny splint his leg, they formed a plan. They would gather Kyle and even Cartman. They needed all the help they could get and investigate the source of the cult's power. "The book mentioned a portal beneath South Park," Kenny explained. "I think it's under Stark's Pond. That's where the cult first performed their ritual when my mom was pregnant with me." By morning, Kenny's leg had healed completely, another aspect of his curse gift. The boys met at Stan's house, including a reluctant Cartman who only agreed to come after Stan mentioned the possibility of treasure in the underwater cave. "So let me get this straight," Kyle said as they walked toward Stark's Pond. "Kenny is immortal because his white trash parents joined a cult, and now the cult wants to use him to bring some tentacle monster into our dimension." "Pretty much," Kenny nodded. "Weak," commented Cartman. "Your parents couldn't even cult right. My mom would have at least gotten a sweet car or something out of the deal." The pond was frozen over, but the ice was thin enough that they could break through with rocks. They had brought scuba gear, borrowed from Stan's Uncle Jimbo's hunting supplies store. The plan was to dive down and find the underwater cave system that's supposedly connected to this interdimensional portal. "Are we really doing this?" Kyle asked nervously as they prepared to dive. "Shouldn't we tell an adult or something?" "The adults are either in the cult or won't believe us," Stan replied, adjusting his breathing apparatus. "It's up to us guys." It always is. One by one, they broke through the ice and descended into the dark waters of Stark's Pond. Kenny led the way, feeling an inexplicable pull guiding him deeper. The visibility was poor, but their flashlights revealed glimpses of the pond bottom, and something else. Strange, geometric carvings in the rocks that seemed to glow with their own faint light. Kenny spotted an opening in the rock face and signaled the others to follow. They swam through a narrow tunnel that angled downward, much deeper than Stark's Pond should have been. Physics seemed to bend as they swam, distances distorting impossibly. Finally, they emerged in an air-filled cavern, so vast their lights couldn't reach the ceiling or far walls. The stone floor was carved with intricate symbols that matched those in Kenny's family book. A phosphorescent fungus provided dim illumination, revealing stone columns and an altar at the center of the chamber. As they removed their scuba gear, Cartman whistled. "Holy shit, you guys. This is like Indiana Jones but creepier." "These markings are ancient," Kyle said, examining the floor carvings. "But some of them look fresh." Kenny approached the altar with trepidation. Upon it lay a stone tablet covered in the same eldritch language as his book. With trembling fingers, he traced the symbols. "I can read this," he realized aloud. "It says, 'The immortal child born of sacrifice shall be the gate. Through death and rebirth, the way is prepared. When the stars align, the Lord of Madness shall pass through the living gate and remake all worlds in his image." A cold realization washed over Kenny. "Guys, I'm not just connected to Cthulhu. I am the portal. Every time I die and come back, the barrier between dimensions gets weaker." The implications hit him like a freight train. His entire existence was a cosmic tragedy designed to eventually bring about the end of the world. Before the boys could process this revelation, echoing chants reached their ears. Flashlight beams appeared at another entrance to the cavern. The cultists had found another way in and were converging on their location. "Run!" Stan yelled, but it was too late. Cultists surrounded them from all sides, cutting off any escape. Kenny's parents stepped forward from the crowd, their eyes vacant yet somehow aware. "It's time, son," Kevin Sr. said solemnly. "Time for you to fulfill your destiny." Kenny stood protectively in front of his friends. "I won't let you use me to end the world." "Oh, but you already have been used," came a new voice, smooth and familiar. The cultists parted to reveal none other than their teacher, Mr. Garrison, wearing elaborate robes and holding an ornate dagger. "You didn't think your parents were smart enough to mastermind this, did you?" Mr. Garrison laughed. "They're just pawns, like most of these idiots. The true servants of Cthulhu have been guiding events in South Park for generations." Kyle gasped. That explains so much about this town. As the cultists closed in, Kenny made a split-second decision. If he was the living portal, perhaps he could use that to his advantage. He grabbed the ceremonial dagger from Mr. Garrison's hands and before anyone could stop him, plunged it into his own heart. "Kenny!" his friends screamed in unison. As darkness claimed him, Kenny's last thought was a hope that somehow, this sacrificial death might disrupt the cult's plans long enough for his friends to escape. He felt his consciousness fading, but instead of the usual void before reawakening, he found himself drifting toward something else, a vast, ancient presence waiting between worlds. Cthulhu, Chapter 4, Between Worlds. Death was different this time. Usually when Kenny died, there was darkness, then a sensation of movement, and then he would wake up in his bed as if nothing had happened. But now, Kenny found himself floating in a void filled with impossible colors and geometries that shifted and pulsed with alien rhythms. In the distance, although distance itself seemed meaningless here, loomed a presence so vast that Kenny's mind could only perceive fragments of it. A suggestion of tentacles, a cluster of eyes, a darkness deeper than the space between stars. Cthulhu, the great old one, waited at the threshold between realities, and Kenny was being drawn inexorably toward it. So small, a voice reverberated in Kenny's mind, a sound like oceans boiling and mountains crumbling. So fragile, yet you contain multitudes, the perfect vessel. Kenny tried to speak, but had no mouth in this place. Instead, his thoughts projected outward. What do you want from me? A sensation like laughter, cold and ancient, washed over him. Want? I have existed before your species crawled from the primordial ooze. I will exist long after your sun has burned to ash. I do not want, I simply am, and soon I shall be in your world again. Images flashed through Kenny's consciousness. Prehistoric South Park, where ancient peoples performed rituals at the site that would one day become Stark's Pond. The founding of the modern town, guided secretly by cultists who felt the call of the old ones. Kenny's parents, young and desperate, attending a cult meeting where they drank strange brews and offered their unborn child in exchange for a better life. Your sacrifice was imperfect, Cthulhu's voice continued. The ritual was flawed. Instead of a clean gateway, you became stuck, a repeating cycle of death and rebirth, each iteration weakening the veil between worlds. Kenny understood now. His immortality wasn't just a curse. It was a cosmic machine, grinding away at reality with each death and resurrection. How many times have you died, little one? Hundreds, thousands, each death a crack in the wall, each rebirth a widening of the breach. With horrifying clarity, Kenny saw the truth. The cult didn't need to perform some grand ritual. They simply needed to keep him in South Park, dying over and over, until the barrier was weak enough for Cthulhu to push through. But something didn't make sense. If that's true, Kenny thought, why are you still trapped? Why haven't you crossed over already? The vast presence seemed to shift, focusing more attention on Kenny. A sensation like being studied by a million microscopes at once. Clever child, you are correct. Something resists. Something within you fights the process. Your deaths weaken the barrier, but your will, your humanity, reinforces it. Kenny felt a glimmer of hope. He wasn't just a passive tool in this cosmic game. Somehow, he had been fighting back all along, unconsciously preserving the barrier even as his deaths eroded it. The cult believes the stars have aligned, Cthulhu continued. They will attempt to break your resistance with the rite of revelation. If they succeed, your next death will be the last nail in reality's coffin. In the distance, Kenny could sense his body being prepared for resurrection. Soon he would wake up in his bed, and the cult would be waiting for nightfall to perform their ritual. I won't let you through, Kenny projected defiantly. The presence seemed amused. You cannot stop what has been in motion since before your birth, but perhaps there is another way. Kenny felt something enormous, an alien brush against his consciousness, a tentacle of thought from the vast mind of Cthulhu. In that brief contact, information transferred, images, symbols, words in languages that no human had spoken for millennia. A bargain, Cthulhu proposed. I have waited eons. I can wait longer. Use what I have shown you to close the pathway permanently. End your cycle of death and rebirth. In exchange, I shall withdraw from this particular breach and seek entrance elsewhere in another time, another world. Kenny hesitated. Could he trust this entity of cosmic chaos? Did he have a choice? Why would you help me stop your own return? Kenny asked suspiciously. Help? No, this is merely a game adjustment, Eternity is long, little immortal. Sometimes the delay is as satisfying as the culmination, and your resistance has proven. Interesting. Show me what you will do with this knowledge. Before Kenny could respond, he felt a pulling sensation. His consciousness was being yanked back toward life, back toward his body. Remember, Cthulhu's voice faded as Kenny was drawn away. The answer lies in your question mark. Mysterion and the immortal child, two sides of the same coin. Kenny gasped awake in his bed, sunlight streaming through his window. His hand immediately went to his chest, where the dagger had pierced his heart, smooth skin, no wound. Another perfect resurrection. But this time, his mind was filled with alien knowledge, symbols and words that burned behind his eyes. Now he knew how the cult had bound him to Cthulhu, and perhaps how to break that binding once and for all. Kenny reached for his Mysterion costume, examining the question mark emblem. It wasn't just a random symbol he had chosen. It was an ancient sigil, one that represented the eternal cycle and the power to break it. He had work to do before nightfall. If the cult succeeded with their rite of revelation, his resistance would be broken, and his next death would bring Cthulhu into the world. But armed with forbidden knowledge granted by the Old One itself, Kenny finally had a chance to end his curse and save reality in the process. As he dressed, Kenny wondered if he could trust the information Cthulhu had given him, or if this was just another layer of manipulation. Either way, he had no choice but to try. He only hoped his friends were okay after he left them in the cavern. It was time for Mysterion to make one final stand against the cult of Cthulhu. Chapter 5. The Breaking of the Cycle. South Park was eerily quiet as the sun began to set. Kenny made his way to Kyle's house first, relieved to find that his friends had somehow escaped the cavern. Stan, Kyle, and even Cartman had gathered to plan their next move. "Dude, we thought you were gone for good this time," Stan said, embracing Kenny. "Yeah, after you stabbed yourself, which was super dramatic by the way, the cult freaked out," Kyle explained. "They started chanting even louder, but then this weird earthquake hit, and part of the cave collapsed. We escaped in the confusion." Cartman, sitting on Kyle's bed and eating cheesy poofs, nodded. "It was pretty cool, actually. Mr. Garrison got crushed by a boulder. Serves him right for all those pop quizzes." Kenny took a deep breath. "Guys, I know how to end this. When I died, I met Cthulhu." He explained his experience in the void between worlds, the knowledge Cthulhu had shared, and the true nature of his immortality curse. His friends listened with wide eyes. "So let me get this straight," Kyle said when Kenny finished. "The cult is going to perform a ritual tonight that will break your mental resistance, and then the next time you die, Cthulhu will use you as a gateway to enter our world and basically cause the apocalypse." "Pretty much," Kenny nodded. "And your plan is to use the information that Cthulhu itself gave you to supposedly close the portal permanently?" Stan asked skeptically. "I know it sounds like a trap," Kenny admitted, "but it's the only chance we have." Cartman burped loudly. "I still don't understand why Cthulhu would give you the cheat codes to stop himself." Kenny had been pondering that same question. I think he sees this all as a game, a cosmic entertainment. Maybe having me resist makes it more interesting for him. Or maybe he's just screwing with you, and that ritual will actually speed up his arrival," Kyle pointed out. "It's a risk I have to take," Kenny said firmly, "but I'll need your help." The plan they devised was dangerous but simple. While the cult would be gathering at Stark's Pond for the rite of revelation, Kenny would perform a counter-ritual in his bedroom, the place where he always resurrected. Stan, Kyle, and Cartman would create a diversion to keep the cultists distracted long enough for Kenny to complete his task. As night fell, Kenny prepared his room according to the knowledge Cthulhu had placed in his mind. He drew complex symbols on the floor with salt and his own blood, positioned candles at precise points, and placed his Mysterion question mark emblem at the center of the arrangement. Meanwhile, his friends had gone to Stark's Pond with fireworks borrowed from Jimbo's store, planning to disrupt the cult gathering. Alone in his room, Kenny began the incantation, speaking words in a language so ancient it made his tongue feel numb. The symbols on the floor began to glow with an unearthly light, and the air grew heavy with potential. At Stark's Pond, the cult had gathered in full force. Nearly half the town was there, including Kenny's parents. They formed concentric circles around a bonfire, chanting as they awaited their leaders to begin the rite of revelation. Suddenly, the night sky exploded with color as fireworks screamed overhead. The cultists looked up in confusion as more fireworks burst directly above them, some dangerously close. "Behold!" shouted a voice from the tree line. Stan stood there, wrapped in a bedsheet, waving his arms dramatically. "I am the messenger of Cthulhu. The ritual must be performed at the community center instead." Beside him, Kyle and Cartman were launching more fireworks, creating chaos among the cultists. "The stars are wrong here," Stan continued. "You have displeased the Dark Lord with your incompetence." The cult members looked at each other in confusion. Mr. Mackey, who had apparently taken over leadership after Mr. Garrison's demise, stepped forward. "But MK, the ancient text specifically said Stark's Pond was the place of power, MK. Are you questioning the will of Cthulhu?" Stan bellowed, while Kyle set off their largest firework yet, which exploded in a formation eerily resembling a tentacled face. The confusion bought precious minutes for Kenny, who continued his ritual uninterrupted. As he spoke the final words of the incantation, the question mark emblem began to levitate, spinning slowly in the air. Kenny felt a pulling sensation in his chest, as if something was being extracted from his very soul. "By my will and my blood, I close the pathway," Kenny intoned, reciting the words Cthulhu had placed in his mind. "I break the cycle of death and rebirth. I reclaim my humanity and seal the breach between worlds." The room filled with blinding light, and Kenny felt a pain unlike any he had experienced in his countless deaths. This was deeper, more fundamental, as if his very existence was being rewritten. At Stark's Pond, the cultists suddenly froze mid-chant. One by one, they began to shake their heads, looking around in confusion. "Why are we all standing out here in the cold?" Randy Marsh asked, removing his ceremonial hood. "And why am I wearing this stupid robe?" "Last thing I remember, MK, was grading papers in my office," Mr. Mackey said, equally confused. Throughout the town, people who had been under the influence of the cult began to snap out of their trance, the knowledge of Cthulhu and the rituals fading from their minds like a forgotten dream. Back in Kenny's room, the light faded, leaving the boy collapsed on the floor, the question mark emblem now a blackened, twisted piece of metal beside him. Kenny lay still, barely breathing but alive. When he finally opened his eyes, he felt different. The constant pressure at the back of his mind, the awareness of his curse that had always been there, was gone. Kenny knew with absolute certainty that he was mortal now. The next time he died, it would be permanent. The door burst open as Stan, Kyle, and Cartman rushed in. "Dude, it worked," Stan exclaimed. "The cult just disbanded." Everyone started acting normal again. "Well, South Park normal," Kyle clarified, "which is still pretty messed up." Cartman looked disappointed. "So does this mean no apocalypse? I was kind of looking forward to ruling over the wasteland as a warlord." Kenny sat up slowly, smiling beneath his parka hood. "It's over. The curse is broken." "So you're not immortal anymore?" Kyle asked. Kenny shook his head. "One life, just like you guys." The boys were quiet for a moment, processing the magnitude of this change. "Well, you better not waste it by doing something stupid like jumping off a cliff or playing in traffic," Stan finally said. Kenny laughed. Don't worry, I plan to be very careful from now on. As his friends helped him to his feet, Kenny felt a strange mix of emotions. Fear, certainly. Death was now a permanent threat rather than a temporary inconvenience. But also relief and even joy. He was free from his cosmic burden. He was just a normal kid from South Park now. Well, as normal as anyone could be in this bizarre mountain town. The next morning, Kenny's parents had no memory of their involvement with the cult or of the bargain they had made before his birth. His father was back to his usual unemployed, alcoholic self, and his mother seemed to have no recollection of ever worshipping ancient cosmic entities. At school, Mr. Garrison, who had apparently survived the cave-in after all, was back to teaching inappropriate material and making questionable comments, with no sign that he had ever been a cult leader. Life in South Park returned to its strange version of normal. Aliens still abducted cattle occasionally. The mayor still made terrible decisions. Mr. Hankey still visited at Christmas. But the shadow of Cthulhu no longer loomed over the town, and Kenny McCormick now faced each day knowing it could genuinely be his last. As he sat with his friends at lunch, listening to them argue about the latest Terrence and Philip episode, Kenny felt something he hadn't experienced in a very long time. Simple happiness. No cosmic dread, no certainty of painful death and resurrection, just the ordinary joy of being a kid with friends in a weird little mountain town. Somewhere beyond the stars, in a dimension of madness and chaos, Cthulhu turned his vast attention elsewhere, seeking other worlds, other gateways. The game in South Park had reached its conclusion, unsatisfying perhaps, but eternity was long, and there were always new games to play. Kenny pulled down his hood, revealing his full face to his friends, something he rarely did. "You know what, guys?" he said clearly, his voice no longer muffled by the orange fabric. "I think this is going to be a good year." His friends stared at him in shock. "Holy shit," Cartman exclaimed. "We can understand what Kenny's saying." They all burst into laughter, and for once, Kenny knew that whatever happened tomorrow, he would face it as just Kenny McCormick. No longer the immortal child, no longer Mysterion, just a boy with one precious life to live. The end.